All right. Well, thank you for taking the time out of your day, Coach Davenport, to kind of talk to us a little bit about what you're doing out there and what you've done before with with coaching basketball. If you don't mind, just kind of start us off with kind of how you got on to your coaching journey in general.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think this is a great deal because I think there's a lot of questions that can be asked, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions with coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up. I played for my father in college, and obviously he was coaching college basketball. Was a high school coach when I was born. Took an assistant job at Louisville when I was in like third grade, and then he coached at Louisville for the next 9 years. Took over at Bellarmine my senior year in high school, and then I went on to play 4 years at Bellarmine. Immediately upon, I knew I wanted to coach pretty early on. And kind of part of the reason I played at Bellarmine, it was kind of down to either playing here or going somewhere else, just through and I think this will probably come up several times in the conversation. Coaching circles are so small and everybody knows everybody. And when it came down to decide what I was going to do in college, it was either play at Bellarmine or I was going to go to the University of Cincinnati, where Mick Cronin had just taken over.
Mm-hmm.
And Coach Cronin is one of my dad's best friends on earth. They work together. And that's how a lot of these jobs come about. I think it's probably cliche to call it a fraternity, but it is, because you get part of these family trees almost, these coaching trees. And I'm really fortunate that, ironically, instead of going to Cincinnati, I ended up as a GA at Xavier, which was also through some connection with my father and also some basketball campsite work and knew some people. So I was a GA for 2 years at Xavier. I got my master's in sports administration there. I left Xavier in the spring of 2012, right around this time. I guess it was right after the Final Four, so it's probably early April 2012.
Mm-hmm.
I took a job as the ops guy, the director of basketball operations at Winthrop, where one of our assistants at Xavier had just taken the head job.
Mm-hmm.
I moved, I think I drove from Cincinnati to Rock Hill, South Carolina, 3 times in probably a 6 or 7 day span.
Whoa.
Maybe 10 days. I moved down there on a Thursday, had a moving truck picking my stuff up in Cincinnati to bring it down there. And the following Monday, before my stuff had even arrived, I got a call from Coach Pitino, and they had an opening on their staff, and I ended up taking that. So before I ever even moved to Rock Hill, I left Rock Hill. And now Winthrop, who's doing great. They're in the tournament this week. And I ended up at Louisville for 3 years, went to EKU last year.
Mm-hmm.
My dad had an opening on staff, came back home in August of last year, and now just still playing our first season since I've been back.
Wow. So
yeah, that was a lot. That was the unabridged version, I guess.
And that's still, boy, that's a lot of moves in a very short period of time. So,
yeah.
Wow. What advice would you have? Well, actually, let's pick apart that misconceptions part. What do you think are some of the common misconceptions that folks have about, trying to be a coach on the collegiate level?
I think, and I'm sure this is with every line of work, people think it's really easy. You put on a suit on game night, you go out there, you call some plays, you coach them up a little bit. When in reality, especially as you're coming up, as a GA at Xavier, my days started, I would usually work out our walk-ons or red shirts at about 7 in the morning. You probably get to the office earlier than that so you can get your own workout in, get a little sweat out, and work those guys out. Then starting at 8 o'clock, as a GA, it's a lot of manual labor and grunt work between film work, checking classes, making sure guys are where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there, which seems like it sounds simpler than it is. And you have to kind of be willing to make a lot of sacrifices in your personal life because you're not going to have a lot of time. There's almost no time to yourself. And as you come up the ladder, I think people would be surprised at how little of your time is, at the college level, how little of your time is spent really on basketball itself. grunt work is probably the best way to put it. You're going to spend a lot of hours in front of a laptop cutting down film, breaking down film for assistants who then will, it's different on every staff, how they do it. But, ultimately, film takes a lot of time, and there's no shortcut to it. You're going to be watching a lot of game film, but it's a great way to learn. Mm-hmm. And that's just during the season. In the off season, the way things have changed now, there really is almost no off season. Mm-hmm. In the Division I level, you can basically you can start conditioning and lifting and individual instruction stuff on the court starting the first day of school. That goes right up until you start your 20-hour week, which is our in-season rule that starts 6 weeks prior to your first game. Mm-hmm. Then you are in season where, if you're lucky and you're in a conference that plays Thursday, Saturday like the OVC, you'll get Sundays off. If you're a league like the MAC that plays Saturday, Tuesday, you get Wednesdays off, and you're still in your office all day. So you're talking where you're literally going to go from the middle of October until April without ever really having a true day off. A lot of places you'll get 2 or 3 days of Christmas, but I've been on the of it. Because the way this is, if TV dictates your schedule and you have a game on December 27th, well, you're not sending your kids home. It's tough. And that's part of kind of the misconception. I think just the hours. I don't think people have a full appreciation for everything that goes into it. And I'm not saying that other professions don't do it, but you're going to work a lot of hours when you're young and not make a lot of money. That part's a little hard. And I think that Quanzo Martin just signed it. Just took the job in Missouri yesterday, and you see he gets 5 years guaranteed that could turn into 7 at $3.5 million a year. Woo. Well, that's great for him. But coaching as a whole, probably the top 0.1% is making, as much as the next 50% put together. Mm-hmm. And people, I think you turn on Big Monday on a Monday night, you see ACC games. Well, that's not the reality across college basketball. There's a lot more Richmond, Kentuckys than there are Louisville or Kentucky or even Cincinnati, Xavier. Those kind of places. That's such a small percent of college athletics.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. And, how to say, so you've obviously been working hard in this for, I guess, how many is it 6 years out of your undergraduate?
I'm 29. I had 2 years at Xavier, 3 at Louisville. That's 5. 1 at EKU. But this is my 7th year in coaching.
Okay, yeah. So you've been, and not trying to denigrate, but obviously you're still in the assistant role. And most folks, about what age do you see where they typically get their first head coaching job at, not to denigrate, but like something more than just like a high school or club team?
I mean, that's where it's tough. Like some guy, I read an article this morning about a guy who is in his early 60s and had been a college assistant for, I think, like a total of like 32 years. And he had actually had 3 head jobs for a total of 7 years. But he didn't get his first crack, I think, until like 48 or 49. So, some guys never. Mm-hmm. Some guys, part of it's like any other aspect of life. Like you got to know yourself. Mm-hmm. And for me, just the way I operate, I wanted to be a head coach. Like I want to be a head coach sooner rather than later. Yeah. And if that happens here, that'd be a great thing. If it happens somewhere else, that's a great thing too. But coming here was a move to come back to my alma mater, mm-hmm. work for my father. And ultimately, this is just me, working at a place like Bellarmine that you believe in. Mm-hmm. Maybe if it's something else in our conference that opens up, or a place I personally, and I'll take it. I mean, the hardest part, you don't get to pick your path in this. Yeah. Very rarely. You move where the jobs are, and that part's really hard. Some guys, I think, would rather be an ACC assistant where you might make $300,000, but you're not your own boss.
Yeah.
other guys who I know have kind of been willing to. I'll give you an example. We're in the Elite Eight next week.
Mm-hmm.
The head coach of Fairmont State, they're the highest seed. We're 1 seed. They're 1 seed. Remaining was an assistant for Bob Huggins at West Virginia. Fairmont State's only, 45 minutes maybe from Morgantown.
Mm-hmm.
He left Huggins' staff. Now, I don't know for a fact if he took a pay cut. I believe he did. Took a pay cut to become the head coach of Fairmont State because it was the thought he thought he could build into a winning program and ultimately get himself his next job from there.
Mm-hmm.
And some guys are more content. Steve Robinson's been Roy Williams' assistant for like 25 years at Kansas and Carolina. I'm sure he's passed up on head coaching opportunities at some point along the way, and he's obviously more content in that role. It's different for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you've seen it from both, familial experience and then obviously experience in a number of different roles that the pressure and everything else and obviously the requirements of the job changes depending on what, are you the head, are you the assistant, are you a GA?
Right.
And I can't fault a person for being content with being an assistant, for their
Correct.
career. Cause,
if it's a comfortable situation, yeah, it's hard to knock that.
Yeah, and I mean, and kind of speaking of the difference between being an assistant, a GA, and a head coach, I guess some folks would maybe use the term like being under a microscope, but it seems that, at least this is based on my ignorance, and I'm more than happy for you to clean that up, of where as you go up the ranks, that's more and more people watching you. That's when you get into the media, and of course, the media always tells you that you're the worst coach in the world, even if your team is winning. And how do you feel the kind of the pressure, or how does the pressure change? Does it increase, or is it just the type of pressure changes as you go up the ranks?
I got to be honest, like, for me, and I think this is just me, and I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I think my father's like this.
Mm-hmm.
And we draw really well at Bellarmine, crowd-wise. We draw very well, and we're covered pretty well by the local media.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you get the same constant criticism that you do in a place like Louisville or Kentucky.
Yeah.
But I think for most coaches, like, I can't imagine me feeling any more pressure at Louisville than I do at Bellarmine or I did at EKU or Xavier.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people, and now this may be ignorant because this is just the way I'm wired, and I guess I assume that everybody coaching is wired like me.
Mm-hmm.
The pressure is internal.
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing with a lot of type A personalities who are very, very, very competitive and oftentimes want to do things their own way because everybody in this game thinks that they know better than the next guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves. And I'm 29, right at the age, in the last few years, in the last probably 2 off seasons, more and more guys who I knew who were around my age, probably within a couple years older than me, kind of get out. Because if you flatlined and that you're not moving up and you're not on a staff that you think, so much of what we do, you're just attaching yourself to your head coach. Mm-hmm. And if it's somebody you really believe in, somebody you really think can make the jump, and to be very honest with you, like, the reason I was going to Winthrop when I first took the job is because I thought Pat Kelsey's the head coach there. Mm-hmm. Pat was an assistant at Xavier. I thought Coach Kelsey was an absolute all-star. Mm-hmm. And to his credit, had I stayed there, Pat has, I think, broke the record most wins in the history of the Big South in the first 5 years, like for a coach.
Wow.
Yeah, he got to the conference championship 4 straight years. They lost twice in overtime. And they got beat on kind of the last second shot. And this year they finally got over the hump and won it. Nice. But and this shows you how fine the line is. Mm-hmm. They get beat in overtime in the Big South Championship games, tie for the regular season championship, get beat, and people he almost, I think people started kind of thinking like maybe this guy can't win the big one, which is ridiculous to say. They ended up winning it this year, but he was almost judged based on what he's done over the course of 4 or 5 years, which he's done an unbelievable job on the fact that maybe whoever I don't remember who they played last year, Charleston Southern maybe, whoever they played got hot and hit a few more threes than they usually would the second half of a game. Or it was either last year, 2 years ago, Winthrop missed like 6 free throws the last 2 minutes of the game. In an overtime game, well, so if they missed 4 free throws, now he's a great coach. And I think that's one of the hardest things to handle in coaching is you don't have complete control. You really don't. If you see coaches get fired all the time because they have this subpar year where you look at their roster and maybe their best player tears an ACL. Well, that doesn't make you a bad coach. It makes you unlucky.
Yeah.
Nobody's trying to have a kid tear an ACL or a kid jumps up for a rebound, lands on a foot, and rolls an ankle. And if he's your best player, he's out for 3 weeks of conference play, and now you lose 4 out of 6 games. You go from 3rd in the league down to 7th in the league. And now you're a bad coach. And I think that's really hard. That's why it seems like the guys who are the most consistently successful are very, very, very comfortable in their own skin. You have to have a lot of confidence in what you do and recruit to it and develop kids to it. And I think ultimately, we always say I think the most critical thing a coach can say of another coach or another program is they don't have a plan. Like when you're just constantly throwing spitballs at a wall and seeing what sticks, you're probably going to be in trouble. You got to have a consistent plan, and everything you do in your program, from how you practice to how you condition and lift to how you recruit to how you play, all has to it's all cogs in a machine. It's all got to fit together and work together to be. Now you could throw a bunch of spitballs at the wall and 5 out of 6 stick, and now you got a really good team one year. But to be consistently successful, you've got to have a plan, and it's got to be organized, and you've got to know how to implement it.
Nice. So, if you had to start your coaching career over again, and let's say you've got none of your contacts or otherwise, essentially, if you were in the shoes of some of the kids in my class, what would be your first suggestions for them to get their foot in the door or to try to get some experience in the field?
I saw there was a tweet like a month ago. Darren Rovell put it out, and it was something about like X% of people who work in sports started off volunteering. And when I was a GA at Xavier, I got tuition paid for. That was it. And I think you have to accept the fact you're going to probably do a lot of menial tasks for not a lot of money, and you better develop a network. Like, I was really lucky because, to be honest, and I don't mean this as it sounds, I was born into a network. My dad is a coaching life where he knew a lot of people. If you didn't know anybody and you're not playing at the college level, you better become a manager. You better get in your car in the summers. I worked summer camps every year in college. Get in the car and go meet people. And when you meet them, you have to be ready and willing to. No task is beneath you. You have to understand that to get started. And the more people you can meet, and the more people you can work for, and ultimately the more people you can impress in this game, I think people, your resume is almost useless, to be honest with you. You're not going to get a lot of jobs in this game by blindly sending a piece of paper to somebody you don't know. You've got to have people willing to get on the phone for you and make calls and vouch for you and help you. Or if you're really lucky, you get somebody you personally know who's in a position to hire you. And the more people you've been good to, and the more people who think you're very responsible and reliable, and they like you because you always present yourself with the right attitude, the more people you can do that to, then the better chance you have of getting hired by one of those guys. So the thing I would say is like, if you're at EKU and you want to be a coach and you're not already working for the athletic department at EKU in some capacity, you're making a huge mistake. If you're also limiting your contacts and your network only to people at EKU, you're making another huge mistake. Start off wherever you can get in, and then if it's on the men's staff at EKU, the women's staff, if you want to coach football, get with them. I promise you, everybody on those staffs has friends in coaching at other schools, other leagues, other levels who can help you out. But none of them are going to help you out unless somebody is willing to personally vouch for you and put a stamp on your name.
Nice. I mean, it makes sense because obviously you're limited on how many coaches you can have. You're always
Correct.
limited on your budget and everything else. So why
Correct.
invest in a wild card if you got somebody that someone else can tell you point blank is the person that's going to deliver?
Correct.
Awesome. You really answered a lot of those questions in one fell swoop there. I like it. And I like the part about no job being beneath you. And man, now I'm having to dig through my questions here because you answered a bunch of them all at once. I like it. What other, I guess you could say, because you've obviously pointed out the fact that the work-life balance is, not too balanced when you're trying, especially, early on in your career, or obviously when you're trying to, aspire to greater things, you're going to have to put in more work. What would you suggest are some things that the kids can do to avoid burnout or, to not feel like, my job is only slicing film, what, to make the process a little less severe.
Sitting in this room, if anybody sitting in this room can look at Dr. Lane, you can see that exercising and working out is a great relief.
Yeah.
It's for me, and this is, and I'm not knocking anybody else in the country because I know a lot of coaches across the country work hard.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine there are many places who work significantly more hours than we did at Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
And I can, one of the funny little quirks about Coach Patino, if Coach P calls you, you're expected to answer your phone, period.
Mm.
And you're pretty much on call, which that's fine. That's part of the gig. I got no problem with that. The only time, one of the few acceptable excuses. Sorry, Coach, I was outside on a run. I didn't take my phone with me. You understand the importance of your physical well-being, and for me, the physical part of it really
Mm-hmm.
helped me mentally.
Mm-hmm.
If even during the busiest time of the year, which this week I can assure you in the Louisville basketball office, UK's basketball office,
Mm-hmm.
this week is insane because you find out who you play on Sunday night,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately your entire season is defined by how you play the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Even during the busiest time of the year, even if I didn't get to go outside and get 6 or 7 miles in, I could hop on a treadmill in our practice facility and I could get on there for 25 or 30 minutes and I could at least get a full sweat out.
Yeah.
And take a shower and be refreshed. So that's one huge thing. Two, there is something to focusing on the task at hand and becoming we used to always talk about this with Xavier, and Coach Mack was great about this. Let's become solution oriented, not problem oriented. If there's a task or a problem in front of you, instead of dwelling on it, let's talk about how do we correct it or fix it, and then implement that and move on. So
Mm-hmm.
if we had gotten lit up in the second half the night before, we just weren't getting any stops. We can sit there and say, Dr. Lane is a terrible offender. We can't play. Well, in college basketball, there's no trades. It's not the NBA. We're not going to bring in new guys on February 18th. It's not going to happen. So what do we need to do to get freshman A up to speed where he can perform at the level we want him to perform at?
Mm-hmm.
And I think by focusing on solutions and coming up with solutions and shortening the task, if you got to make a list, if that's how you work, that's fine. But literally come up with the tasks you need to improve on, or whatever you need to accomplish that day. Cross it off and go on to the next. To me, that's always helped keep me sane.
Mm-hmm.
Is not, and all of a sudden when you think you have so much to do, you got 100 things you got to do, but you probably don't. You probably got 7 or 8 things you really need to accomplish. So sit down, accomplish one, cross it off, go on to the next. If you got to go take a 15-minute walk outside between it, that's fine too. to me, that always helped me. And then you have to understand, and if anybody wants to coach, and this is regardless of any level, if it's good for the kids, it's probably the right thing to do. And you have to remember at all times that no matter what else is going on in coaching, if you're not doing stuff that benefits the kids, you're doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It could improve them as a player, improve them as a person, help them 10 years from now when they get into the professional world, whatever it is. And ultimately, that is why we're here. And I think sometimes in college basketball, especially the higher level you get, I think sometimes we forget that because there are 23,000 people to show up to your game and all the money that's involved in it. But like at the end of the day, you got to remember they're 18 to 22 years old. And when I was 19 or 20 years old, man, I was doing dumb stuff too. And that's something that like you have to remember. You can't stay. I think there's like a separation. Separate the personal problems from the basketball problems, or not personal issues, I guess I should say. Like, remember they're kids and coach them and try to help them get better so that your next practice is better, your next film session is better, your next game is better.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I think you've already answered it from a number of different facets, but what mistakes, aside from obviously being random with their game plan and not putting the work in, do you see coaches doing that's essentially hurting their career or limiting what they can do?
I think people who think there's no such thing as quick fixes. Mm-hmm. Like everything in coaching, that's why it's so important to have a plan, have patience, have confidence in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself and your staff doesn't believe in you as a head coach, I've never been a head coach, but I know the most important is we got to have everybody in that room buying into what the head coach believes. And if they don't, like, that's a big problem. I think most guys get in trouble when they maybe take some character issues over. All right, here, and this is just me. I'm not saying I don't have it all figured out. I would rather have a kid that was 1 inch shorter or a little less athletic, who we knew was a great kid and would fit into our program and our system, better than the kid who's a couple inches taller, a little more athletic, maybe a little sexier of a recruit, a little more high profile, whatever. I heard one of the best things I've ever done in coaching. I got to sit with Tony Bennett, who's the head coach of Virginia, and probably going to be the heir to when Coach K, when Coach Pitino, when Boeheim, when Coach Williams at North Carolina, when they all retire, which is going to be in the next few years. Tony Bennett could possibly suck up that power vacuum in the ACC. And he said, this was an old like Larry Brown thing. He said, if you take a big bowl of ice cream and you put just a little, and I'll give you the word he used. He said, if you put a little turd in there, it ruins the entire bowl of ice cream. He said, versus if you have a big bowl of turds and you put a little bit of ice cream in there, it's still ruined. So he said, his point was it only takes one guy. The one guy can ruin a locker room, can ruin a team, can this time of year, I think the most important thing you can do with your team is they have to want the season to never end. And like I can tell you, the kids in our locker room, they love playing here. We have seniors. We won. We got to host the first couple rounds of our NCAA tournament. We win the game, and they were very emotional after the game because it was their last home game they've ever played, or they'll ever play here.
Oh wow!
And that's what we're trying to create. So even though we won and they were so excited, they were very, very upset that they'll never get to play here again. And when you have that from your seniors, that stuff trickles down. And that's the single most important thing you can do is have great kids who buy into the program and don't taking risks on recruits. I'd rather have a kid who struggled in the classroom but tried than somebody who you can deal with that. If they're going to try, you can deal with that. But when you bring in guys who think it's about them, when it's about the team, that's really hard to fix. And then you create jealousy among other players, and then you have guys who are just ready for the season to be over.
And that shows up as soon as you get into that tournament play.
Yes. It reveals itself really quickly.
Awesome. So, any questions that I haven't come across yet, or that you would like to talk about, or questions in general that you wish more people would ask you whenever they do, ask you about coaching and working with the athletes and everything?
No, not really. I just think that in general, you have to keep things in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And one game, one practice doesn't define who you are unless you let it define who you are.
Mm-hmm.
There are going to be nights that you've done a good job preparing the guys, and the kids want to play hard and they want to play well, and they miss some shots. And maybe the other team banks in a couple of threes, and you lose the game by 3 on the road. You get a couple tough whistles. That's going to happen. You have to be yourself. You have to figure out what makes the most sense of how to coach for you. Like, I've been under great head coaches, and I'm really, really lucky, but I can never coach. I'm never going to do everything exactly the way Coach Patino did it. I can't.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do things the way Coach Mack did it. But I can take little bits and pieces that blend with my own personality, and you have to have kind of your own brand, your own flair on it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be somebody else. That's impossible. And I think that some young coaches get in trouble because they work for this guy, they want to be like this guy, or they read this guy's book and they said, "Wow, man, that's great. Look what Bob Huggins did. I'm gonna be like him." Well, Bob Huggins is a unique character. You're not him. You can't do it. And I think that it's just a matter, develop a plan. And for me, like, I put it on paper. I wrote it. I constantly write things down. I constantly tweak them and change them.
Mm-hmm.
Things that, when, knock on wood, if I'm ever lucky enough to get a head job, that I'll be able to refer to 10 years from now. And when I write it down, it's kind of like, okay, why did I think this at the time?
Mm-hmm.
Because chances are you're going to come across similar problems, over and over again. And try to have a consistent approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why constantly I'm always writing down like new ideas, good ideas, bad ideas, mistakes I made, things that I wish I'd do differently, things that I thought were great, things that I want to remember 10 years from now. Hey, try this with a team. If you have this problem, try this. And I find it very hard. Some people can do it, but I find it very hard to believe anybody can be that organized without writing stuff down. If you want to keep it, I keep mine. I have a running diary that I save to my Dropbox so that I can get it from my phone, my iPad, my laptop, anywhere in the world.
Nice.
And that's how I do it. I'm not saying that's what everybody should do. Some guys, I know, my dad still has every single practice plan since he was a high school coach. He saves them in file cabinets. Yeah, and that's different people. But I strongly recommend that.
And that fits only in one filing cabinet, I think, for as long as his career's been at this point.
He's got him year by year.
Oh, geez.
Year by day. It's impressive.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, Coach, thank you again for your time, and I really appreciate you answering the questions. So,
no, thanks. But if anybody in the class or needs anything, my email is on our website. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'd love to help anybody out. If anybody wants to give me a shout, that'd be great too.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and good luck to the Bellarmine Knights in their postseason. I hope to hear you guys are still moving up and getting into the final games.
Me too. Thanks, Dr. Lane. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right.